At 4:30 p.m. on a quiet summer day, investigators quietly returned to the Wells property. Not the front door, not to the living room, but to the margins, a shed, the creek side, the fence line. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell now, so you'll get first-hand updates on this story and others the moment they're verified. Summer Wells' disappearance in June 2021 remains one of Tennessee's most puzzling missing child cases. The basics are chillingly simple and stubbornly unresolved. A 5-year-old girl last seen at her rural family home on Ben Hill Road. Searches launched immediately, and no clear physical trace that shows where she went. Over the past years, the case attracted intense local attention, national interest, thousands of tips, and deeply personal scrutiny of the family's timeline and statements. Now, with investigators reportedly returning to the property and focusing attention on an overlooked shed and a tight 2-hour window, starting around 4:30 p.m., the case has taken a new procedural turn. That renewed focus demands careful explanation. What was searched, why the shed matters, what investigators hope to uncover, and how those actions fit into facts already on the public record. The Wells disappearance changed lives and routines the evening it was reported. Search teams at First Day expanded outward from the family property. Friends, neighbors, volunteers, K-9 units, drones, and state agents scoured creek beds, tree lines, and outbuildings. Despite large-scale efforts, the physical evidence that typically anchors such inquiries, a torn piece of clothing, boot prints, a tire scuff, a discarded toy, was absent or inconclusive. Without a clear trail, the case shifted into a heavy reliance on human accounts. Who saw what, when, and where? The problem with human accounts, even honest ones, is that memory is fallible, and when memories diverge or remain incomplete, the investigative map grows hazy. That haziness is why any new procedural step, like a quiet return to property months or years later, draws immediate attention. Investigators' decision to focus on the property perimeter rather than the house itself is practically significant. In missing person work, searches typically start with the most obvious places, bedrooms, backyards, obvious pathways, and then widen outward. What gets missed early on are the subtle concealment spaces, a shallow depression hidden under vines, the interior of an old shed that blends into fields, or an embankment behind brush. A shed may be small and unremarkable, but it can also be a functional black box, a place to stash tools, a structure not routinely inspected, and a shelter where footprints and scent can be quickly obscured by weather. Forensic teams know that time and the elements can degrade or erase surface clues, but that microenvironments, under floorboard, inside old paint cans, beneath pallets, can preserve chemical traces or fibers that elsewhere have vanished. Returning to such a structure after new leads or new analytical techniques become available is standard police work. It is not by itself an accusation. It is a methodical act designed to test possibilities that initial searches may have overlooked. The shed near Beach Creek Road has reportedly been in investigators' crosshairs because of its geography and visibility. A shed located on the perimeter of a property, especially one that faces a low-traffic lane or backs onto dense brush, functions differently than a structure closer to the household. It may be unattended during daily family activity, making it plausible that someone could approach it without being noticed by the adults inside the main house. Investigators and searchers are trained to consider sightlines. From where could someone watch activity at the house? From which angles would the house be concealed? A shed that sits between a house and an otherwise secluded tree line can create exactly the sort of visual blind spot that would make it attractive to someone who wished to hide something, or conversely, why an accidental disappearance might have no obvious witnesses. Why the 2-hour window beginning at roughly 4:30 p.m. matters. Missing child cases live and die by timelines. Minutes matter. If the 2-hour period following 4:30 p.m. represents the span between an adult's last confirmed action and the moment someone discovered Summer missing, it becomes a critical aperture for both elimination and focus. Investigators will try to anchor that window with objective timestamps. Cellular tower pings, social media posts, vehicle movement recorded by traffic cameras, store receipts, or even timestamps in emergency department records. But when those anchors are weak or absent, every documented movement near the property, who left, who returned, where a vehicle was parked, whether neighbors came or went, becomes magnified. The arrival and departure of outside workers, such as tree trimmers, adds another layer. Outside personnel change the usual movement pattern around the home, creating moments when a household is occupied but attention is divided, or when external activity masks an unusual approach. Reports that tree trimmers had departed the scene shortly before the 2-hour window are consequential in two ways. First, the departure creates a natural lull. If outside workers leave, neighbors and family members who may have been looking toward the road could assume a return to normalcy and reduce vigilance. Second, workers, including contractors, often leave a cluttered scene, equipment, vehicles, temporary footpaths. Those transient elements can conceal, confuse, or erase footprints and scent trails, complicating K-9 searches and forensic mapping. If investigators later conclude the area was unusually quiet after the trimmers left, it narrows a time frame during which an unnoticed action could have occurred and explains why a missing person could vanish from a yard where others briefly were present earlier in the day. Experts also point out the shed's obscure placement may have allowed forensic opportunities to be missed during initial search sweeps. When searches are conducted quickly, resources focus on larger, more urgent zones, open fields, visible water, common routes. Small structures with clutter, rodents, and toolboxes are often treated as lower priority early on, especially in community-led searches where safety and rapid coverage take precedence. That practical reality can leave critical microevidence behind in places only careful, laboratory-style searches reveal later. A scrap of fabric caked in mud beneath a shelf, a soil composition change that hints at recent digging, or trace DNA on items previously thought irrelevant. Returning with a fresh, methodical approach and specialized equipment can turn a thoroughly combed area into a new source of leads. Attention to Don Wells' movements that afternoon, specifically his first stop after returning home being near the shed, is a factual detail that has raised questions for observers and investigators alike. Public reporting has noted inconsistencies in timelines provided by different family members, and investigators always treat such inconsistencies as grounds for further clarification. Again, a crucial point of responsible reporting. Timing inconsistencies do not automatically establish culpability. People under extreme stress often misremember or conflate events. But in the absence of physical evidence, those moments of friction in accounts become the threads investigators tug on to see whether they reveal a larger pattern. That is likely why detectives would return to property and to the exact spots where observed activity was said to have occurred. The mention of selective memory and controlled exposure points to a known investigative phenomenon. Families and communities under sustained scrutiny sometimes converge on a shared narrative either through repeated interviews, through media exposure, or through the natural human desire for a coherent story. Investigators try to tease apart what was independently recalled versus what emerged through conversation. A controlled exposure, where narrative is managed tightly by a spokesperson or legal counsel, can be prudent for a family under attack online. It can protect privacy, reduce misstatements, and preserve legal options. But it can also raise suspicion if consistent phrasing seems rehearsed and if critical verifiable details remain unshared or vague. Law enforcement must balance empathy for trauma with the duty to secure factual clarity. Re-interviewing in neutral settings, seeking contemporaneous records, and comparing independent witness statements are common steps. Possibility of third-party involvement, knowingly or unknowingly, remains on the table. There are broadly three categories to consider. 1. Unknown, opportunistic third parties, a stranger who acted in a brief window. 2. Third parties who arrive with intent but had no prior connection to the family. For example, someone who used a shed or pathway as a convenience. Or 3, third parties with pre-existing connections who could access the property without raising notice. Investigators use phone records, vehicle registrations, license plate recognition, and interview canvassing to narrow those vectors. In rural areas, visitors, transit workers, and vehicles passing by can all complicate the picture. The presence of third parties does not mean they committed a crime. They may simply be describing part of the background noise that complicates missing person reconstruction. Child Protective Services' oversight of the Wells family prior to Summer's disappearance is another element that figures into investigative and public conversation. Where CPS or other welfare agencies have had involvement, investigators sometimes find that families delay public disclosures or change phrasing out of fear, triggering further intervention. The legal and emotional calculus is complex. Parents may worry about losing custody, about being judged, or about a hostile public reaction, any of which may influence how and when an event is reported. Investigators and social services officials understand that fear of CPS intervention can have chilling effects on the immediate reporting of critical incidents. At the same time, officials must also consider whether such fear could contribute to delay that compromises evidence. The presence of prior CPS involvement is therefore a relevant contextual factor, not proof of either a cover-up or innocence, but social reality that may influence decision-making in high-pressure moments. Taken together, these details produce a set of practical takeaways investigators and the public should consider carefully. First, the 2-hour silence after 4:30 p.m. is not a literary device. It is a focused investigative window that can be bounded and tested. Investigators can check timestamps, phone logs, vehicle data, and any recorded interactions during that interval. Second, the renewed attention to the property perimeter, and specifically to the shed, reflect a methodical attempt to search overlooked microenvironments where evidence can persist even after exhaustive initial sweeps. Third, anomalous behaviors, like the adult stop near the shed, produce legitimate follow-ups. They are investigative prompts, not verdicts. Fourth, family silence and inconsistent narratives may be strategic responses to external pressures as much as they are sources of suspicion. Context matters. And finally, the possibility that fear of CPS intervention influenced the timing and nature of reporting is a reminder that investigative truth sits at the intersection of human emotions, legal frameworks, and forensic realities. As this inquiry continues, the most important measure is evidence. Timestamps that pin activity to the hour, soil and material tests from the shed and surrounding areas, phone metadata that confirms or contradicts stated locations, and undisturbed traces that can be analyzed in controlled lab environments. If investigators find corroborative physical traces at the shed or along the property perimeter, that will allow them to move beyond hypothesis. If they do not find anything, the investigation will have narrowed suspected scenarios and will redirect resources accordingly. What we must also remember is the human cost behind the procedural language. Missing person cases are public dramas with private victims. The family, whether cooperative or guarded, endures scrutiny, grief, and a long, invasive public process. The community endures rumor and anxiety. Investigators carry both the duty to be thorough and the burden of not tipping investigative strategies through premature disclosure. For every procedural step taken, like quietly returning to a shed at 4:30 p.m., there's an ethical responsibility to follow the evidence, protect the family's privacy where appropriate, and communicate transparently when facts solidify. If you have timestamp information, photographs with metadata, or first-hand recollections that place people or vehicles near the Wells property during the 2-hour window after 4:30 p.m., contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation or local law enforcement. Verifiable tips processed through official channels are the pathway to usable evidence. Avoid posting speculation to social feeds that could contaminate memory or jeopardize an investigation. In closing, the renewed focus on the shed and the 2-hour gap is not proof that the case has been solved. It is evidence of an investigative pivot, a re-examination of a space and a moment that might contain what previous searches missed. The work ahead is painstaking. Test the ground, verify timelines, and respect the human stakes. For now, the central truth is this. When a missing child case returns to a specific place in a short window of time, investigators are following where the evidence, or the absence of it, leads. Stay tuned for verified updates. In cases like this, patience, rigor, and corroborated facts are the only reliable routes to justice.